So what I did in my process is as I waited for my other images to dry, I got started on the layer of a new one. So I think I have some nice warm yellow here already. I want to examine the yellow that I see in the photo and try to figure out what the local color is. It seems like it's a similar warm yellow, maybe toned down just a bit more. So I've got like a tea wash of cadmium yellow, a big puddle of it, with a little bit of violet pigment in there from the tube. I'm using my Shinhan set, so they just call it violet. But the pigment code on that is PV3 and then PR81. So it's got a little extra red to it, which is fine for my painting because this is a very pink painting. But I have a very tea wash, and it's something that I'm going to want to manipulate in wet on wet in the process. So I think what I'm going to do is drop in a little bit of violet in some spots after I wash things in. But let me start with the wash. I'm going to do the background of the flower as well, but I just need to be careful that I don't accidentally paint onto some of the other... Hang on, hold up, wait a minute. I want this to be real nice, and I can see that there's a lot of graphite on the paper because I forgot to dust it off. So before I keep going, I'm just going to try to dust off when I can. Oops. Dusting the paper off after you've traced with a lot of graphite can help, because you don't want to have a bunch of dirty, nasty looking graphite swimming around in your painting. And if you are also doing that rock at the beach that's on the handout, I purposely painted with the graphite, the excess graphite on the paper to show you how nasty it looks. But you can already kind of see it in this because it was already floating around in my mix, unfortunately. That's okay. I think the end result will be fine. Now, I noticed, though, while I was talking to you about all that and thinking about all that, I did not isolate these white areas. They're at a very light value, so I might be able to work with it. But while I have it still in the wet and wet phase, I can kind of start to play around with some stuff to get a softer effect and get some value changes that are interesting. So I can see that there's going to be a lot of warm red. It's going to turn into a violet eventually. So I'm going to get some warm red. And I'm dropping in a little bit inside the flower where I see those colors are going to serve me. What I'm also kind of trying to do, I'm going to pick some up. Is I'm trying to get a little bit of that color into this pollen area right here. You'll notice that it didn't spread a whole lot when I dropped it down because of the moisture level of the paper. The moisture level of the paper, and also the viscosity of the paint itself. So if I got some a little bit thinner, and some other areas of wetness, you'll have different effects. I don't want to do too much of this right now because it's all washed in, and so it has the potential to just flow everywhere. I'm taking my brush and I'm picking up a little bit of that pigment. No details yet. I'm really just working on what this base layer is going to do. and how it will serve me after it dries. My brush, I'm just tapping it on my paper towel and then tapping it a little bit on the still moist paper. Now I'm going to let that dry. I see a little puddle here that I want to pick up. I'm going to pick that up. And a little bit of excess wetness over here. I've got my head to the side. I don't know if you can see me, but I've got my head to the side and I'm looking at the sheen of the paper with just some light coming out of the window to see if there's any areas where it's really puddled up. Okay, that's nice. That'll bleed out and blossom out a little bit and give me some initial darker values to work with as I bring them up. It looks like some of my other examples are starting to dry, so I'll shift over to those. And then we'll come back to this as I do this. So just a touch of yellow and a puddle of water, and then some warm red. Warm red makes such a lovely pink, and it's the basis for a lot of these kind of rose named colors. Okay, I'm testing my pink and it looks too red. I want to bring a little bit more yellow in. Just a touch. Oh my gosh, I always overdo it with this stuff, so I want to be really careful. I don't want to turn this into orange. Okay. Test on the side. Okay, I think this color is legit. Now, before I keep going though, I see that there's some parts of the petal that have this nice kind of soft blown out lines to them that would be served by a wet on wet process. So I think while I have this tea mix ready to go, I also want to make a thicker, cooler red violet that I can start developing in the center of those flowers. So I'm going to get really thick pink going. And I really want to think about what I'm going to use to make this red violet. Am I going to use tube violet, which is so nice and convenient? Am I going to mix one up? I think for now I'm just going to stick with the warm red, and I'm going to come in with some darker blues and blacks to darken up that value. So I'm not going to worry too much on the wet on wet process with the darkest of it. But in the meantime, let's just wash the flower petal areas with a nice tea wash. Now I want to be careful that I don't inadvertently wash over that pollen thing, because that needs to stay in that nice color. Uh-oh, I'm a little lost. There it is. I want to be careful. I'm not trying to do the green part, just the pink part. I think the green part will be dark enough to wash over it and not worry about the edges. And then I can also see how that the variation that I dropped in earlier is reading under the paint that I'm putting down now, and I can see that it's a little too cool. So I want to be careful. I mean, with these green areas, you can paint over because that red is going to help tone them. kind of with some of our other paintings that we're doing in this experiment, is the red underneath can help tone your green in a way that's more natural. So trying to make this wash even all the way through. Pick up any extra puddles. And then there's some pink, some more pink down in here in the foreground. So I'll make sure to do that one too. And what's on the side there? I think that's just the edge of the petal and then some variation in green that I saw in the background. There's also kind of some pink up in the background of the top. I'm not going to worry about that for this one. So now that we've got things a little bit wet, I'm going to take that warmer, darker red and come in on some of these areas that are going to have darker values. And as I do this, I'm trying to define the edges of that little pollen thing. Hope my head's not in the way for this. And I'm going to try to bring it near the edge where I drew, showing that the values were changing. Now there's this really nice kind of streakiness that I'd love to kind of try to recreate, but I think my paper is a little too dry for that. So we'll just leave that alone for now. I can come back and do that. I do see some dark values over in here that I can put in there. And a little bit back here. Now I'm doing this while the paper is still wet because I want it to kind of bleed a little bit. What is this, a green thing? I better just fill that in or that's going to be a bad edge waiting to happen. Okay, so all of this stuff can sit and talk amongst themselves. And then when we come back, we'll see if it bled out really nice the way we wanted to. It's kind of starting to, so that's nice. Some more. My next layer has dried, and I feel like it bloomed out in ways that are nice right here. Over here, I can see my paper was too dry, which kind of sucks because that's more of a background petal, but whatever. We'll define these ones a little more clearly. So what I'd like to do next, well, I've got this kind of yellow in the center that I didn't define before I got into all this pink stuff. I don't think it's the end of the world, but I do need to get into that purple, which is kind of the opposite of what I want to do with this thing. So before I do all that purple, why don't I just put in a little bit of yellow where I need it to be. Now I had some pink down already, which is nice because I wanted it to pick up some of that. And then I'm going to take some off my brush and just kind of tap it. This yellow is almost opaque. I don't think I'm defining the shape of it too well. So maybe while I've got it wet and activated, I can come in with a little bit of violet and poke around in the area that needs to get darker. Oh, there we go. Now it's starting to look more 3D. I can define the shape of it as I come in with some darker values later. While I'm at it, I may as well do the same for that other little thing of pollen there. It's not quite as bright as the foreground one, but I think I can just kind of punch it in with some of that violet. Oh man, that was too much. There we go. Just a little. You don't want it to turn violet. You just want it to be an ugly color of yellow. And then there's kind of some pink that got on it. But once I define that with these darker values, I think it'll be okay. It's not super wet what I just did. So I feel confident that I could keep going. First things first, I'm going to wet this with clear water. This is this petal here. It's more in the background. It should be much softer. I'm hoping a nice layer there can kind of soften up that edge for me. I mean, I could do some wet and wet around it. And some cool red. And see if I can kind of soften it up that way. Little painter's trick there. We'll see if it works. That needs to come in darker too. So let me think about what I'm going to use for this color here. Because I've got this really nice mid-range pink, but it gets into this like black pink. So, pardon me, I'm going to get some more of my cool red. And I'm going to try and see what happens if I lean it into the violet that I have in my kit. It's thick paint. I'm pulling a lot of red from my source. Liquid watercolors just makes it so easy to thicken up your paint. I re-wet all the stuff that I used today, so some of it didn't get as thick as I would like, but when you really want to push these darkest values, you can take it straight from the tube and get it closer to what you're trying to get at. Alright, so I've got that red. I'm hitting it with some violet. Test on the side, see how it looks. Oh, that's really nice. I think I'm going to go for it. Now this area of the most darkness in the middle, I'm going to try to go for that first and use the tip of my brush to carefully try to define the shape of that pollen thing. It has kind of a bumpy edge to it, so I like that. I really want to be able to show that using a little bit of negative space painting to define some of the little chunks of pollen there. That's cool. It's looking more like what I want, but I can't let all this around it dry while I'm doing this, or I'm really going to muck it up. So let me come back around this and start to try to define the shape of the petals using my brush stroke. It comes out pretty far, but I really tried to sketch that in for myself where the values change, because that's what's important, is that I'm getting it lighter where it's supposed to be getting lighter. And then once I come out to that edge, I'm going to start kind of whipping my brush out and creating those shapes that I see. I want it to follow the curve of the petal and observe how it kind of, those curves shorten and change as it comes around the front of it. I love painting flowers, and this is the kind of thing that I could really spend significant time defining and just making perfect. Since I'm just demonstrating it for you guys today, I'm not going to sit here and do a 4-hour video for you. Nobody wants that. But as I came around the edge, and you'll probably notice this too, is that as you come around that edge, it's the edge of that blob I first made was starting to dry. And so I had to use my brush to kind of pick that up as I go. While it's still wet though, I can come in with something darker, and honestly, I don't know if purple is going to be the answer. I think black is going to be the answer. So I'll go a little more purple, but I'm actually going to put some lamp black, or ivory black is what I've got. I'm using ivory black, but it's not too different for our purposes. But I really want this to be a super dark value that I can drop in to this bottom part here while it's still really wet and let that bloom out into what I've already done. Hopefully it can seep into those little crevices that I made around the pollen. I like that. Help to clean up some of those edges that might have formed. It's pretty nice. There's some areas that I notice of shadow in the lighter parts of the petal. And now that I have this interesting mix that I used to do those darkest values inside flower, I could probably use some of that, a light tone of it, to get into some of these shadow areas. Needs a bit more red. I just got a huge glob of red. I didn't mean to do that. Oops. Okay, a little more red in my mix. But really light, like a tea wash. I can come into some of these areas of the flower that need a little bit more shadow and definition and create those shapes and barriers now. Oops, got a little too much there. You can spend all afternoon flicking at the edges of the petal and making it look like the photo. Like I said, I love doing this kind of stuff. This little folded petal here needs a bit of shadow, right? This is the fun part when you get into all these little details. This one over here has a lot of shadow, more so than all the value changes in that one that we did. There's a bit of darkness at the bottom, and then it gets into some green. So I think I'm going to actually want to do that green first, because if the green touches that violet, it's going to mix in a weird way. But what I'm doing here is this process that I had mentioned before called painting short, where you're painting the same area, you're just painting less of it, with a slightly darker, slightly more, slightly thicker variation of the same color. So I'm looking at the photo to help me figure out where everything should go. There's that kind of dark area that's going to get darker. It has some stuff that kind of flicks off the top, which would have been nice to do over here actually before I got into that darker values, to do some of that kind of hatching and creating those shadows. But you know, that's why I'm really trying to stress for you the idea of figuring out your process, your layering process, because as you can see, if you skip a step along the way, it creates problems. There's kind of a folded petal here that I see that I want to try to find on my tracing and make sure I can, oh, that's too dark. That's under a petal anyway, so we can kind of fudge that. That's one of the things that I love about painting flowers, is that if you skip something or you miss something, you put the wrong thing somewhere, you can kind of fudge it, because, you know, you're the one who's looking at the source. Now I can define this darker area with some value. I can see that my sketch, my initial tracing was kind of weird in this spot, but that's okay. Try to define this one too. This has some nice pollen right there that I'm sure you see how you could mask that to get those details if you wanted to. You could paint around them as well. I just picked up some of that darker value from the other area in the painting and brought a little bit of it over here. I really want to try to create that kind of cupped shape of the flower. And now I'm going to look at some of the leaf shapes below to figure out where those darkest values should go. I think they go here. It's tricky when you get in these parts of flowers that the petals start to fold over. You can see that my violet mix is not quite pink enough for that area, so add a little bit. Oh, almost lost my brush. It just gets so fun. Okay. See some darker values behind this pollen thing that I want to define a bit more, just so I can see the pollen a little better, you know? There we go. Nice, okay. Bring some of these up. And so on and so forth. You can pick and play with your flower petal stuff until you get bored or until you just completely exhaust the whole practice. But it's really fun. Alright, so that's enough shadow stuff on there for now. Come in and do all our greens next. Okay, let's see if we can put some finishing touches on the flower here. Make sure you can see it okay. Alright, if your paper looks a mess like this, then you're doing it right. You should be making 4 things. I'm doing 6 on my paper, so hopefully you have a little bit more room. You can spread them out if you want. You could do it in your notebook if you like. I can already see that I lost some details from my sketch that I think would have been good, especially with the pollen center is a little smaller in my painting than is in the photo. But I'm drinking my coffee, I'm fighting the daylight, and I think it's time to just wrap this one and put finishing touches, which would be our green. Now, lucky for me, I've been nature painting with you all afternoon, so I've got plenty of different kinds of greens in my working palette at this point. I'm going to use what looks like a milk wash, and I'm going to lay in some of this green stuff and try to just call it a day with this painting if we can. Let's see. So there's a little green thing that kind of pokes out, and then it goes this way. It comes up. Oh, this is not the right green, I don't think. That's okay. Comes up there, and then it seems to kind of curve over. And then a little bit more green stuff covers that. Comes back around and goes this way. Okay. That's it. So any of these things that you're painting, start out just with the shape of the thing. Don't try to paint all the details yet. One layer, first layer, base layer of the shape of the thing. If you watch some of the other videos with I did one with leaves where I'm painting short in the leaf, you're going to come back in and add all those details in darker values in a minute. So that's that. Then there was this green thing over here that I painted pink because I wanted to keep bringing the value up. So I'm glad I did that. It'll help neutralize my green and make it a little bit more natural. So I'm going to define the edge of these lighter flower petals as I define that green space in the background flower. Now I know if you're following along with your green, you probably see that it's on top of the pink and it looks gross. That's okay. It gives it a more toned, natural kind of look. Now, the whole background is green, so, I mean, there is a little bit pink in the background, but I'm going to ignore that. I'm wondering how this flower petal got so close to this, but I can see what happened is that think I mistook some of the green for the flower petal. So I can just keep it the way I painted it if I want. Or I could fix it like this. And I'll come back around the other side of the petal. And start to define the rest of these shapes. I dropped my brush earlier in a different demo and got some weird pigment on the side here, but that's okay. So all that yellow that we first laid down, all that pink, kind of hides behind this darker layer of green. And then of course, if this were a full form composition, you know, you'd do more with it. You'd bring it out to the edge of the paper and all that. I see people new starting out painting where they paint kind of motifs, where it's just the flower and there's nothing behind it. And that can be a difficult way to paint because, oops, then you don't have an outer edge to define those lighter shapes, but also it becomes more of a specimen painting than a work of art that someone wants to sit and consider. They just see, okay, that is a flower, and they move on. So sometimes the way we place flowers, you know, like Georgia O'Keeffe, she was really a master of zooming in on nature, but she was able to foreground her subject by placing it in an environment that supported the beauty of the subject. So for this, painting a green background, which is its natural background, we didn't change too much of that, it enhances the image because the complement of green is giving us more contrast to the pink flowers around. So I think my head was in the shot for that whole painting spot, but you can see what I did is I filled in the background. Now I think while the background's still wet is a good time to punch in with some other variations of green that are real soft for a couple of reasons. You want the background to have that soft blobbiness. Maybe some brown would be cool too. But also, the pink that we used for the flower is creating value changes in the paper already. And so the background, if it's not a darker value than those petals as we paint it, you'll see overlap in the edges, which doesn't look good. Like over here, I don't like that overlap. So if I can bring the background down a little bit further in those areas, start to join some of these together. That's okay. That's cool for background. Now this right here is going to stay looking like background unless I can come in and add some value to it. So we've got our lightest value of green here, but this little kind of thing in the front was a little bit darker. I'm looking at the photo to compare and paint these changes. I see where I had put for myself some areas that got darker were here. And then something there. I see a little bit on the leaf there, and then behind this leaf here, kind of goes like that. Good, my little drop of green can get absorbed into it. I feel like the value on the paint on my brush is pretty thick right now, so I wiped some off to kind of try to get in and define some stuff a little bit better. Oh! Sorry. I love getting into the detail layers of the painting because at this point you've used all the colors in your palette, and you can bring them back and reincorporate them. There's also this right here that got darker because it kind of went behind the petal. I think maybe my paper moved while I was tracing this right here, but that's okay. It's, again, more of a background thing. Let's see here, is there anything else I'd like to add? Oh, I think this is good. If you can get it up to this point at least for your experiments, I will be a happy professor.